All right, let's begin. My name is Barry Cooper.
Barry Cooper.
Barry Cooper, one of the best narcotics officers in the country.
How's it going, everyone? I'm currently sitting here in beautiful Los Angeles with David. How do you pronounce your last name?
Ngo. It's a silent N.
Silent N. Okay.
Yeah.
David Ngo and Erin Williams-Weir, two of the brilliant minds behind the new documentary film miniseries, question mark, Never Get Busted, exclamation mark, about Barry Cooper, former drug enforcement cop who turned against the system when he saw the injustices and decided that he would much rather smoke the weed than send people to prison over it.
The only way for Barry to repent for these sins was to say, I was the villain, now I need to be the hero.
Here we are, and it's worth pointing out that the only reason that I'm interviewing you guys is because I'm also a documentary filmmaker, and we have an overlap, if you will, an interview guest, Travis Bowles, who is the main subject of my documentary, An Elegant Weapon, which is about lightsabers and all that. And while I was making that, I was in communication with Travis. Obviously, he was sending me clips and giving me feedback and all that. And he tells me, oh, hey, by the way, you know that Barry Cooper thing I told you about in our interview, but you didn't really use any footage of? I got interviewed for a documentary about that. And this crew is making something, and they flew it from Australia, and I'm moving out of my house, but we did a whole day, and I was just like, this is crazy. So, like, 20 years ago, this guy did all these projects, and now here we are in the modern day interviewing him. And obviously, Barry Cooper is the main subject of your doc. But when I heard that this doc was in production, I was like, I have to meet these people because they're the only people on earth who understand what it's like to interview Travis Bowles and the generosity of his answers and his ability to produce sound bites is second to none.
He's developed into this much more dangerous enemy of law enforcement.
We get into some real cloak and dagger, Breaking Bad, Ozark shit.
We got a lot to talk about because I spent 2 years making a documentary and you guys spent 6 years, which whenever you watch documentary, when you don't know how they're made, you see like, you know, some of the footage will be like dated and you'll be like, why was that 2 years before it came out? Now I know why. Now I know exactly why. So it's just a lot of hours of long work and dark rooms and staring at monitors. So the fact that we are able to, you know, sort of bond over not just Travis's inclusion, but just like, I haven't really been able to talk to anyone who's been on the same side of it as me, at least in terms of like going over the hours and hours of footage and whittling it down and getting the pacing right and all that. So,
yeah, I mean, there's like, yeah, I think it's one of the things that is so incredibly different between narrative and documentary is that narrative, you have a script. So you have a story that you're working to. Whereas in documentary, you have a plan and you sort of go out there and you're just gathering things. You're gathering archive, you're gathering interviews, you're gathering all of that. But all the storytelling is in the edit. Right. That's really where the work begins. And that's why it takes so long because you're really, for us, how many hundreds of hours of footage was there?
There's about 305 hours of archival footage. So that's ranging from, police dash cam footage that we got from Barry Cooper, other kind of media archive that existed on YouTube, and just other hundreds of hours of footage across the internet that had been uploaded.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that's how you guys got all the, because I know Barry sent y'all a lot of stuff, but I was wondering how you ended up with everything else to fill out the story that, yeah, I guess that answers it. I was going to like, did you just Google everything? But I guess that's a yes.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. So Barry sent us kind of tapes. He had some tapes across different parts of the world, I believe, because he was in the Philippines at the time when we reached out to him. And he had boxes of archives in Texas. So we had some boxes flew over from Texas to Australia. That was like the first half. And then he had a lot on his own YouTube. So we downloaded some of that from there. And then other footage, we found on the internet simply through research and kind of the archival process of things. So, he was interviewed by Fox, NBC, and other kind of different news stations around the world. So doing a lot of research and just typing in Barry Cooper and seeing where that takes you was fascinating.
There was such like an enormous amount of research that Erin had already done. And then we had an archival producer as well come on and like dig into more stuff that might be in the commercial sphere as well, like on various TV stations and things like that. who, funnily enough, Cassie had also worked on Tiger King, so she'd done a lot of that stuff and found a lot of personal archive through that as well.
Yeah, she was a big contributor to helping find Carol Baskin. So when she were doing like the interview process of like hiring an archival producer, we're like, this is a good fit, I think, in terms of just finding all this extra information. She was fantastic. Yeah. So
we got a bunch of stuff from Travis as well.
I was going to say, yeah.
And how that interview came about is probably one of the most unique experiences as well, because we'd been trying to find Travis for about a year. Because we wanted to find the guy who had originally filmed Barry Cooper's Never Get Busted Again.
C.R. Coltenthaler.
C.R. Coltenthaler, which was his alias. And so we couldn't find him. And Erin was the one who was like doing all this research, trying to find all the subjects, their contact details. Like, she's, diving deep into their sort of lives, which kind of sounds creepy now that you think about it. But
necessary.
But part of the job.
Believe me, I get it.
Yeah. So, but we couldn't find C.R. Coltenthaler. And then we received a Facebook message from Travis saying, I think you've been looking for me. And he said, the start of it said he'd put together a mini documentary and he'd done a to-camera interview himself. And he said, this is a video for two people. It's for David and Erin.
My name is Travis Bowles, and, well, I'm C.R. Coltenthaler.
And he goes into his whole story, and it was like a 10-minute video that told his entire experience working with Barry. And we're like, we've got to interview this guy, like, immediately, because we were already well deep into cutting the film. And there was a big hole, which is the making of the documentary itself, of the DVDs themselves. So we immediately flew over back to Texas from Australia just for that one interview.
So we kind of talked about it at the after party. The documentary premiered at Sundance in February, end of February,
end of
January. But it was only the 45-minute cut, which we'll get into all that later. But then Travis flew out for that and got to see the lightsabers on the screen, and you guys included just a few seconds of it. But it is weirdly enough like almost the exact amount of Never Get Busted footage that I used in my doc, just to be like, hey, he was also doing this. Anyway, back to the lightsabers. So anyway, the Travis thing, yes, I love that video. I rewatched it so many times just to be like, this is crazy. But coming from the documentary filmmaker's perspective, there's almost like, was there that moment where obviously you're like, we got to go interview this guy, but was it also just like a big picture thing of like, how much of this doc is going to change after we get back, after we talk to Travis?
It did and it didn't change. Like, really, it was just like in terms of the storytelling that we'd laid out, it just was like a scene that we really wanted that we just couldn't do properly. So we sort of, in the cut, we kind of skip over it. We sort of have the idea, like Barry comes up with wanting to do this Never Get Busted thing, and then it's sort of made. So we skipped over the actual process of it, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of fun that happens there. But when you tell that story purely just from Barry's perspective, you have no one to bounce off. So every scene that we put in there, we want to make sure that there's another character that has a perspective on that, and is also, it's easy for any film to be too just centric on one person, and it's easy for you to tire of that, no matter who that is. And Barry's obviously an incredibly charismatic person, but even then, that can be a bit much. So we always wanted to find every scene, every part of the story, which Erin had researched for close to a year. We made sure when we blocked down that story, it's like, Barry, early days of being a cop, Barry joins the Permian Basin Drug Task Force, Barry quits the force, Barry becomes a preacher, Barry does Never Get Busted. Each of those sections, we want to make sure that the gamut of all the people that we interviewed effectively covered the entirety of his story, and were first person, subjects to that experience. Otherwise, it just feels like with longer documentaries, you can easily get, tired of them if you're not sort of refreshed pretty regularly from an audience perspective.
No, and I think Travis is aware of that himself, because he's been a content producer, basically his whole life, but professionally like the last 25 years. So when I was in the process of editing it, at least I had interviewed him first, and I think maybe I interviewed his friend Pruitt, who was a big, figure in that part of it. And he's like, I want you to interview as many people as you can, because I don't want this to just be the Travis Bowles show. And I was like, it's not. But then at the end of it, I'm like, I mean, it kind of is, but it was all his idea, you know? It's inevitable. Like the never get busted story is the Barry Cooper story. There's no way around it. And like, if there's one person you're going to ask as to what happened and, you know, from their side of the story, obviously Barry's the one you want to get, whether or not he's going to tell you the whole truth. I don't think he really has a reason not to. He seems like a pretty forthcoming guy, at least in terms of like he wouldn't change details to make himself sound better in the story. But again, I don't know.
I think that's what makes it, you know, I mean, you try and tell, like we always said from the start of the process, like we're just objective observers to the story that unfolds in front of us. So we really did like do our utmost to get different perspectives because, you know, in a way, no matter who you are, whether you're Barry Cooper or somebody else, you experience every story and every moment only from your own perspective.
Absolutely.
And so we wanted to make sure that balances out so that, you know, Barry went up against some people who don't necessarily agree with the actions that he took, whether it was exposing, you know, police tactics or police corruption or any of those things. There's a flip side to that story as well, right? Because ultimately, that's what makes documentaries interesting or storytelling interesting anyway, is the conflict. Like that's what it's all about, is sort of the drama and what your perspective is at the end of watching it and how that changes. So we wanted to make sure that in making this, it wasn't just Barry's autobiography. You know, we wanted to make sure that there were other people who spoke to it as well.
Right. But also, I think like when you're telling a story or retelling a story about your life, no matter who you are, you do have a particular perspective on your own story. So as well as having different perspectives to kind of add to the objectivity of it all, you're still going to kind of only remember it in a certain way. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how audiences do, you know, see through or see what kind of Barry's story is and how they kind of interpret that. But again, like as filmmakers, we're just kind of telling the story as is, but the audience might, you know, pick up on different things.
Yeah, and we tried to as well, like, because I remember, you know, that 5 days interviewing Barry, it was like...
In the Philippines?
No, we originally interviewed him in Australia. So we flew him to Australia.
Oh, okay.
And this was before Tiger King had come out. So it felt like sort of zeitgeist in a way that those kinds of stories that were like these larger than life characters doing wild things. And even how it was all put together. And one of our EPs executive produced Tiger King as well.
Yeah, that's also a crazy story. Not just the Travis connection, but like, so the Chris, I'll let you tell it, but like the fact that the second I heard that Chris Smith was involved, I was like, American movie Chris Smith?
Your AT&T Universal card has arrived? Oh, God. Kick fucking ass, I got a MasterCard. I don't believe it, man. Life is kind of cool sometimes.
When I think of a director of a documentary, I think about like the stuff that they've helmed, not necessarily like Tiger King. He did, I'm sure, help out in any number of ways. But when you go to watch Tiger King, you're not going because it's a Chris Smith production. But hearing that, well, you go ahead and tell the story of how did you guys get introduced to Chris Smith and how did that all come about?
So we had found, will you tell the first part in terms of like how we found the story in the first place, because it follows on from there.
Yeah, I guess so. So when we first discovered Barry's story, it was in roughly like February of 2019. So we saw a short interview of his story online, and it only told a very maybe like 5-10 minute version of what his story was, but you know, it was larger than life character. Very charismatic, very outgoing, had like a fedora on, and we're just like, how is Matthew McConaughey or Woody Harrelson not played this guy in kind of a scripted version? So the more we researched it, nothing had been done, and that's when we started doing the project. Dave comes from, you know, a narrative background in producing and editing. My background's in international sales, like film and television, so I would travel to different film festivals around the world, like Cannes, Berlin, TIFF, and kind of taking the experience of the market and now putting it into producing. We're like, there's something in this. We don't know what it is yet, but there's something here. So David and I basically decided to kind of finance it ourselves and take that risk and like just run with it. So that's kind of how we got connected with Barry, and then flew him over to do the first interview. And then maybe you can talk about kind of how that teaser came together and how Chris...
Well, pretty much we filmed him right at the start of COVID. And poor Barry got stuck in Australia for about 6 months because of that. Because
damn.
Because he's in exile
Right.
from the US and he's not a Filipino citizen, which is where he lives, right? So he couldn't go anywhere. So he was stuck in Australia with his wife for about 6 months. Everything was shut down. And during that period, like we were working on the teaser. So we put together like a 3.5 minute kind of teaser of like what we think this thing's going to be. And even looking at the final film, so many of those stylistic choices were already embedded in that teaser that we put together. And then we sent it out and it just kind of caught wildfire. Like it really got out there to a lot of people. People were really excited about it. And we ended up speaking to a lot of the sort of, top producers and executives around the world in the documentary space. And one of those people was John Batzik, who had done Searching for Sugarman that won the Academy Award and, more recently Beckham. And he just loved it. And he was really, really dogged about doing it. And obviously I'm a big fan of his work as well. But he said, do you mind if I send this teaser to Chris Smith? And I'm thinking, American movie, Chris Smith? Like, I remember watching that like at when I was at film school and I was like, wow, you can do a movie like this? It's so cool. And within an hour, we get a message back from John saying he wants to speak to you. So the following day, we did a call with him. And, I'm not going to swear on your podcast, but basically he was...
Go for it.
He was... basically, he was pretty annoyed that we had done this because it was actually a story that was on his list of documentaries he wanted to direct.
Right. Of when he's working on like 4 at one time.
4 at one time.
That was going to be one of the 4. Yeah.
That was going to be one of the 4. So he watched it, but what he said was, look, honestly, I couldn't have done a better job myself. How can I help? So the two of them really teamed up and got us on our way. And it's honestly been like a complete dream working with them, not just because of obviously the caliber of films that they've worked on and represented, but also in terms of like their knowledge of, what works, how to navigate things, is just sage advice.
The legal side of it and all that.
The legal side of it as well, but more so they knew when to push us and when to be supportive, in terms of being like, hey, it's not good enough yet. It's going to get there because, we can tell like this is great stuff, but you need to keep digging. And so that's part of the process as well in terms of why certain things take so long because, what they accept is A++. You know, if you're at A+, they're like, you keep going. It's like, it's got to be every little choice, every little moment, every little thing within it has to really, really work.
Yeah, they're fantastic collaborators throughout the process and such like early believers in it too. So, obviously this took over 6 years to make, but just to have them on board so early in the process and be able to kind of feedback with them throughout was such a dream. Because also you get an executive producer on, sometimes you don't know how much access you're going to have to that. Like different executives obviously work in different ways, but the two of them were just so, great collaborators and they were able to be like available to us throughout that process, which was such a fantastic thing that elevated the whole project.
Yeah. I kind of experienced something similar. That this is why, if you look on IMDb, Travis is actually a producer on my doc, because that's essentially the role he played, with the experience he had just as a media producer or content creator, or whatever you want to call it. Really, it was the opening that he gave the most notes on, where it was like every time he would say something, he would go back into his memory banks and be like, do I have a clip of that? I do. And then I would wait for him to send it and I'd be like, this is perfect. And so, you watch the final product and you're like, wow, this really was just a giant list of like, gotta have this, gotta have this, gotta have this, gotta. And it's ultimately the better for it, even if on my end, it was literally just me editing it. So it's a lot. It's a lot for any production to try and balance all that stuff. But I can sit there and be objective about my own work, or subjective, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, I think people have their own perspectives. Like I don't know if you guys have the same phenomenon where as soon as you finish something, you're like, this is a piece of shit. I don't want anyone to see it. This is awful. It's not done yet. I need longer. And they're like, nope, you got your Sundance deadline. So, chop, chop. But the documentary sphere isn't exactly friendly to that. I want to kind of go back to something you mentioned before, and you brought it up in a few Q&As, or you wanted to talk about the objectivity of being a documentary crew. And I find that it's sort of an interesting, it's like a delicate balance, because at the same time that you want to be like the sort of fly on the wall, like unattached filmmaker, at the same time, these are human beings. Like Barry is a person. He has his own trials and tribulations. And, you know, the amount of time you spend with him, even if it's only 5 days interviewing him or whatever, you can still, you know, there's some sort of human connection that can come across, I think, just naturally, regardless of the context. And then there's also like the phenomenon of like the fact that you are sitting in a dark room looking at a screen, staring at this person's face for years, months and months, hours and hours every day. Like, is there not some sort of subconscious thing that comes across where, like, even if you want to remain objective, at the end of the day, you're still kind of rooting for Barry, despite anything like you might disagree with?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's not quite to the extent of, you know, what a psychiatrist might refer to as transference, you know,
right.
In terms of that. But of course, these are all people that you meet that share their story with you, like across the board. Like there's not a single person that we interviewed that I didn't have some sort of connection with in various different ways, who are on all sides of it as well, right. You know, and, you know, some of them quite combatively so. But when you're there, you know, speaking to them, and, you know, all of them, there was a lot of like conversations before we interviewed them. Erin and I did a trip all around Texas, mostly at the start before, after we filmed with Barry, before we had interviewed other subjects. We spent, what was it, 3 weeks?
3 weeks. Before.
3 weeks, like traveling around Texas, meeting everyone. And with all of them, almost all of them, there was months of conversations before that as well. So of course you build a rapport with someone on a human level, but ultimately, you know, your job as a documentary maker, I believe anyway, is to sort of try and step back from that and think like, okay, what's the story that we're telling with that? What's the best story we can tell? What's its focus? And try to put it a little bit to the side of the humans, the people that you meet, that you had a connection with, and the subjects of your particular story that you're trying to tell.
Right.
Yeah. And I think also just from a producing perspective is just the duty of care that you have for all of your subjects as well. So yeah, like they are subjects, but also in our documentary, they're characters sometimes referred to like within the team. But like Dave said, you know, we really wanted to make sure that everyone that came on camera felt comfortable. So we would do, you know, a dinner with, you know, them or their family. We'd be like, bring anyone that you want, ask as many questions as you want. They like ask any legal questions, anything you want, like whatever you need to feel comfortable to do this. Do you want to do this also? Making sure that they're fully, you know, aware of what they're going into, and then still kind of having that relationship, and they can check in throughout the process as well if they've got questions. Super important in documentary, obviously, because yeah, this is like real people, real stories. And some of the stuff we get into is quite dramatic and quite intense. You know, like Yolanda Madden's story is incredibly heartbreaking. And interviewing her and her father was a pretty emotional day. Yeah. And like you said, like, you know, you're going to connect with people on a human level, but you still have to have that objectivity as a filmmaker. So it's, you know, we're all human. You know, we did get super emotional on that day hearing her story, but also we did have a really good team, and sometimes we would check in with each other to make sure, you know, we're still representing people in a way that an audience could see it, rather than, you know, we probably know way more information than an audience will ever know, but how can we convey the actual story to this audience in, you know, an entertaining but also, you know, real way as well.
Yeah. You often, there are so many moments when I'm in the middle of editing where you find some detail where you're like, why isn't that its own documentary? You know, but it's like, no, we have to stay focused. We have to, you know, keep things on track. So, but like, did that happen while you guys were producing? Was there like any character in this where you're like, why isn't that, like Barry's lawyer would be the first person I would make a documentary about? Like, that's
which one?
I guess the second one. The one that had the most screen time, from what I remember, he's kind of reminded me a little bit of Saul Goodman. Just in that, I don't know. I can't.
Oh yeah,
there's so.
Probably thinking of,
I wish I had seen this. Like, I wish we had been able to have this conversation like the day after the Dances with Films premiere. Which, by the way, they won Best Documentary. So congratulations again on that. That was awesome. Well deserved. As the guy who only saw one documentary at that festival, I gotta agree with the jury's decision. So. But yeah, I and at least in terms of like representing the subjects the best, like I did find that there were a number of times, like Travis and I essentially developed a friendship like throughout the process of editing it. So, I mean, I think that there were definitely times where there would be a clip, but it's not just him. Like it's him and the other people that I interviewed. Like these are still like people that have like jobs, and I'm just like making a fun little, nerdy internet thing. So I'm not out here to like, put anyone on blast, but at the same time, like I want to make sure like, if there's something that someone said in their interview or like something that they say in a clip from 20 years ago that they might not want people to find in case this thing blows up, like I should at least talk to Travis about it and like run it through him. And it was like the trust, like you guys had your months and months of pre-conversations. I didn't really. Like all I did was I tagged Travis on Twitter. I was like, hey, you want to be interviewed? He's like, sure. But you could tell on that first day there was a little bit of apprehension where it's like, what is this? What are you trying to do? But I think that as soon as like he knew that I knew my shit about what I was asking about, that instilled the trust in him to then be able to just go on, and anytime that he would be like, oh, you got to interview this person, he would reach out to them first and say, hey, this guy's making a documentary about me. I trust him. And that was pretty much it. Like I didn't really have the benefit of like a pre-Zoom because I made my documentary on Zoom. Don't recommend it. But you know what I mean? Like it was just like, I have to be grateful to Travis, and not just him as like a producer, but as a human being, that he has all these people that respect and admire him enough to just be like, well, he says Travis vets him. So, all right. And like you said, getting into like the more emotional stuff, mine was like the most, I think, dramatic thing that happens in my doc is roommate drama. So, pretty light fare, but it's still bringing up old emotions from 20 years ago, and they're able to reflect on it and be like, that was silly and we were immature and all this stuff. But like, there is still that moment where it's like, you're asking the subject about it and they're like, do we really have to? It's like, I mean, we're here, we're doing the thing now, you might as well. And if, like I said, I've always sort of, I don't know if this is like standard fare for documentary filmmakers, but my thing has always just been like, if there's something in this, I think I sent a rough cut around when I got like maybe a year and a half through. And I was like, if there's anything in this that you don't want, let me know and I will try to make it work. Because ultimately, I understand that you want to be objective, but I also want to keep a good relationship with these people. I'm not in a professional capacity. So it is just sort of like, yeah, you have a little bit more sway as a subject on this end than you normally would. Like I said, these are still people that are out in the world, and I don't want to interrupt anything that's happening. I just wanted to ask them, like, what was it like swinging a sword around, and then later you looked on the computer and it was glowing? That's really what it came down to. And like your Travis Bowles moment was like kind of like when Ryan Weber, the VFX guy, reached out to Travis and said, hey, I like your thing. Can I make it better? And I mean, it did. And then it became a viral hit. And that's why, they made the second one. And then the third one was like, where's the third one? And 15 years passed. And I'm like, yeah, where is the third one? And then that's how I got into the process of mine. And so I do remember that first night. It was either the first or second interview I did with him. We did like three-hour long interviews. And on one of them, we get to around the point they're making 6 a.m, which is the second lightsaber short. And he's telling me the Barry Cooper story. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. And in my head, I'm going, I can't use any of this, but that's a crazy story. Like, and that was, yeah, like I said, one of those things where you hear about it, you're like, that should probably be its own documentary, but I don't have time for it right now. I'm here to talk about internet stuff. So it's so crazy. Like, I can't imagine how Travis feels. Like, like putting his name as a pseudonym, a pen name, as the director and editor of that first Never Get Busted, with the intention that no one's going to know it's me, ever. And then it wasn't until that this whole thing came about where he was like, okay, I'll come out of the shadows and reveal the truth. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts to that. I mean, one, like, because of like wanting to have that objectivity to the story and the people involved in it, we don't let subjects have a say in what goes into it, because ultimately, like, we want to kind of put as much sort of objective, factual kind of truth in it. Of course, if something is in there that we think like, is not backed up enough in terms of like someone gave an opinion on something, maybe it was off the cuff and maybe that's like not the best thing. Of course, there's some sort of duty of care that we have. But ultimately, like, I personally think that particularly with a lot of these, celebrity docs that are happening that are kind of produced by the celebrity. It's like basically that's a giant PR piece versus it actually being a documentary, which I think crosses over somewhere between journalism and narrative storytelling. You're sort of like somewhere in the middle of those things. But I do think that, I'm not a hardcore documentary purist at all. I mean, it's a pretty kind of wild, put together, there's animation, all sorts of crazy stuff going on in it. But I do think that having some sort of, healthy distance to the people within it, I think is a good thing. I mean, obviously there are other types of documentaries, cinema verite, where that's very, very different. You're kind of almost part of it, all those sort of gonzo documentaries. That's a very different type of documentary to what we're doing in this, which is, sit down interviews, archive, other ways that we help tell the story through, insert photography and stock footage and news articles and things like that. So I think that it's good to sort of have that barrier as much as you can. And in answer to your other question in terms of were there like stories that came up interviewing someone that you're like, wow, that's its own thing? Absolutely. There's tons. And there's like a ton that we want to put into a second film, because really this first film that came out is sort of...
Well, okay, let's set up. For people that don't know, when this was first announced, at least from my perspective, and Travis, I think too, because we're kind of just in the dark until official news comes out. It was there was like some sort of press release, I think through an Australian news source, saying that Never Get Busted, documentary miniseries, 4 episodes, 53 minutes apiece. And I was like, that's great. That's like, almost a 3-hour project. Like that's a ton of Barry Cooper. When they, were announcing hey, we never got busted into Sundance. I'm like, oh, that's great. And they're like, but we're only showing 50 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, hopefully that's just part 1 of 4, because I know there's a whole bunch of story there. And then, Dances with Films comes along, and by this time it's a feature. So, I mean, your whole thing is that you're trying to, well, I guess you can explain it. I'm not trying to do your job for you, but like, you're trying to kind of keeping the two versions in the ether, shopping them around, right? You want to have your feature version, which is the one that premiered at Dances with Films, which is just the Barry Cooper, Never Get Busted, Cop Busters narrative. And it ends as soon as he flees the U.S. But those of us that know anything about Barry Cooper know that's not where the story ends at all. Like, okay, how did he go from that to, bleach blonde hair, tattoos, gold grills, and all that? Like, where are those other 14 years? So it makes sense that there's obviously, I guess I really am just prefacing this because I just wanted to that blows my mind. And I was actually kind of disappointed when I didn't know the full context. I was like, how do you cut out half of your movie? That would kill me if I was a director. Like, I already had trouble making it just succinct enough as it is in 2.5 hours. But I felt so bad hearing that. I'm like, that's got to be the biggest blow, knowing that but I mean, it's still, nothing's set in stone at this point. So it's got to be somewhat comforting.
I mean, it is huge. We had cut together 4 1-hour episodes. We had an incredible edit team working with Julian Hart that did Tinder Swindler and Drive to Survive, and Duncan Hill and the assistant editor Brody King. That was an enormous process for years putting that together. And then it's sort of about, the EPs wanted both options available, right? Because the market's constantly shifting. Some buyers want to only buy features. Some buyers are only about TV series, and they wanted this to be available for all platforms so that it's available for the best platform for this particular story. So
you got the Quibi version edited, right?
Yeah. That's right.
All 4 hours, but
all 4 hours,
6-7 minute segments.
Flick it through. Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I remember having that call with John and Chris, and they were like, "Is this possible? Is it possible to do a feature version as well?" And I'm like, not really. I mean, that's
in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, but no.
Yeah,
no,
but
I don't
no.
want to, but yes, it is physically possible to pull it off.
It's physically possible. And I was like, just give me the week to think about it, to get back into sort of writing what that would look like. And ultimately, and then I'm like, yeah, it can work. It can absolutely work. But by that stage, also, the editors are finished, right? We've cut the series. They're done. They moved on to other things. So the only way this thing gets cut is this guy cutting it. So, to your point earlier about like, you film something and you're editing and you're like kind of in the dark room doing a lot of that stuff. Yeah, that I cut the first episode, like the first cut was done largely by myself, and poor Erin here assistant editing me, which
I
was
took on the assistant editor role when we didn't have finance, and I have a lot of respect for assistant editors. But yeah, Dave is probably going to be pretty modest about all that. But yeah, like when we got to reconsidering it as a feature, and as producing goes like throughout documentary, your financing comes in phases as well. So yeah, we're getting kind of towards, we've got these 4 episodes cut, and now we kind of also want to have this feature available for the market, but we don't really have that much post-production finance in place to do something like that. So there's tons of sacrifices that you have to make as a doc filmmaker, as I'm sure you're well aware of, is like the personal risks, the financial risks that you have to take on. And yeah, David stepping up to cut the feature. So his background also, he's done how many years in editing? 10, 15 years?
15 years I was an editor.
Of editing.
Yeah.
And he knew the story so incredibly well as also. And, I was pretty aware of all the archives. So, the two of us working together, obviously with also our assistant editor, Brody, was still with us to cut that feature together. It was a big process to do. And like you said, because we had 4 episodes already cut and kind of really do feel that was a good version of that story to tell, you have to lose a lot in a feature. So
effectively half of it.
It's tough. Yeah. It's really tough.
And it's different storytelling as well. Series you can go off into these side stories a little bit more and be a bit more open to the world building, as well as just purely like, hey, that's an incredible story that does feed into our overall themes, but it's kind of like a slight sidetrack. You only get a certain amount of that. It's not a lot, even in a series, but in a feature, you get almost 0 of that.
Yeah.
So,
which is kind of surprising that you were able to sort of go down that detour of what her name was, Yolanda.
Yeah. And Raymond. Yeah.
I know, as someone who's seen so many documentaries, I'm sitting there watching it. I'm going, Barry's got to enter this story at some point, and then he does, and it's like, it actually, I think, made me smile when he showed up. I was like, oh, great. Like, it's almost like Mighty Mouse, here I come to save the day. It's kind of, and he did in a way. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, that story is in itself almost a little bit crazier than just like the fake stash house and all that stuff. So
it is like Yolanda and Raymond's story could be its own Making a Murderer series.
Absolutely.
There is so many other just wild details about that. So when we did that kind of pre-interview trip, like Erin and I did, and met with them, we sat down with Yolanda and Raymond for like 2-3 hours as they laid out their story, and my mind was blown. There is so many levels to the corruption they experienced and what they had to go through well before they got to Barry. And that feeling that you have in the film where you're like, you detour and you go into that story for a while, there's a certain elasticity to that. And we pulled it to the kind of max where it kind of builds this tension, and you had the exact thought in your head where you go, but wait a minute, what does this have to do with Barry? And that's when Barry enters the story, and it re-energizes all of that all over again. But if you'd gone maybe another, like a first cut of that we did that was maybe another 4 or 5 minutes longer that had more details of it, you do start feeling that you've lost the thread.
Right.
But in a series, you get a little bit more of that. Like it allows you to do that. So I'd say one of those stories that I do think could make its entire own thing is definitely the Yolanda and Raymond story. There's also Candy's story, which we didn't get into at all,
right,
which is huge.
Which that actually, I had that thought when I was watching the feature version. I was like looking at the time, like, I know this is only like an hour and 50. Are they going to have time to get to any of that? But I mean, sacrifices had to be made, like you said, so.
Feature films are very much like a much more protagonist-driven world. You know, you have much more singularly driven in their arc. And you have supporting characters, essentially, like I'm thinking about in terms of a narrative sense. You know, you have these supporting characters that feed into that, but ultimately you're on this kind of one-way track, sort of from A to B.
Right. Yeah, I definitely experienced that. Like, that is really just like, you know, when you think about a documentary, you sort of think about it like big picture. It's kind of like a big collage. I mean, the way that, going back to like the beginning of our conversation, like the way I wanted to describe it is it's like, and I've actually heard, I think Morgan Neville describe it this way, where he was like, making a documentary is like putting together a puzzle where you don't have the reference picture. and you have to find all of the pieces to make the puzzle complete. And it's like, that is basically what it's like. And so my rough cut for months, it could just be like, you have like 7 or 8 clips in a row and then just a black screen and just like a little text saying, this will go here eventually. So it is just a really long, arduous thing. And it is just like the ultimate test of, I think, human perseverance is being a documentary filmmaker, because you're like, no, it will get done eventually. I'm not going to abandon it. It'll have its time and place. So it's exciting that you guys that you have multiple avenues that you can take, but it's kind of, it's like a catch-22 where you're just like, I would love to be able to tell the whole story, but what does the market have time for it, or, space?
I mean, in my mind, either way that it sort of goes out, if it goes out as a feature, great. If it goes out as a series, great. In the feature scenario, then I'm like, there's a whole second feature,
Right.
that I want to make out of this story. And, depending on the appetite for that, we've shot most of it, we've cut most of it as well. So it would be like an incredible kind of other side to everything that's happened.
Right. And I am planning to blackmail you guys for the 3rd and 4th episode cuts, just so that I can see them, because I need to know. I need to know what happens in between him fleeing the U.S. and when he showed up in Los Angeles a month ago for the first time. Well, he said he had been to Texas for like a week before the premiere, but that was the first time he'd been in the U.S. for like 13, 14 years. And of course, in classic Barry Cooper fashion, you guys were like, hey, we're going to this bar down the road for the after party. We'll all meet there. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And we get there and we're there for about 15, 20 minutes. I'm like, is Barry going to show up? I mean, this is his documentary. This is his whole thing. I mean, he's here. And then, he walks in about 25 minutes late and he's holding a little cardboard box in his hand. And he's like, check it out. And it's legal weed from California. I'm like, of course that's the first thing Barry Cooper would do in America when he's in a legal state. Like, that's the whole reason that he had to leave is because, I mean, as a guy who lives in Texas, I can tell you, obviously it's nowhere as bad as it used to be with like the drug stops and stuff, especially with like all the hemp legalized mumbo jumbo. But it's still not legal. You can't go to the store and buy recreational weed. It's still a black market. So it hasn't fully changed. But the fact that he was in Los Angeles, like, it just is like, of course, that's a classic moment. If anything, I wish that cameras had been rolling on that, because that's hilarious. Like, that's a great, sort of little epilogue to the whole thing, I
mean, it's still illegal in most places as well. It's illegal in Australia.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
That was my first question on my list of questions.
We're about to start the interview.
Do either of you consume marijuana? Is that why you got into the story?
I mean, that wasn't like the reason for getting into it at all. Like, it just seemed like just such a wild story. Like, we didn't take to it to try and have any sort of social or political statement. To me, It's just, when you're looking for a great story, you're looking for a great arc and great conflict, a character that changes, like all of those sort of things. And also, particularly in documentary, someone or a group of people that are going to work on screen, because you can have an incredible story, but if those people are not good on camera, it'll flatten everything else out. And so we knew that we had all those things. It's a wild story. It's someone who literally changes their perspective 180 degrees. There's a lot of danger and conflict in it. And Barry and other people, to the side of it as well, are just incredible, incredible camera talent.
Right. Well, it's also it's still socially relevant. That's ultimately the bigger point, is that, like, it is still, I don't think it's like the policing is nearly as bad. I mean, you'll have a higher chance of getting arrested by ICE than you will by the DEA or whatever in modern America. So, but just the fact that, if he wanted to go back to Texas today, I don't think, there'd be any sort of outstanding warrant or anything. I don't know. I don't know what his legal avenue is like in 2025.
I would say, having reached out to some of those former people that he worked with, you mention his name and you better run. Like, he is not well liked for what he did, even though it's like quite some time ago. Is there outstanding warrants for him? No, not to our knowledge. But, also during his time of doing Cop Busters, they didn't really have many proper legal reasons to harass him the way that they did, but it didn't stop him.
Right. Well, they are the police. It's never really been an issue for them. So you brought up, you got your funding in stages. Was there ever a point where you were trying to get funding and you got turned down because of the subject matter?
That is a good question. I don't. Yes and no.
Okay.
Reveal
as much as you feel comfortable with. If you don't want to say,
I'm
you
going
don't
to
have.
name and shame.
Oh.
No. I'm just kidding. So, I mean, the initial part of the production was just literally financed by Erin and I. We just put up our own money, started filming, cutting together trailers. You know, Erin's effectively working for nothing, like doing a year of research. I'm writing outlines, constantly of like what this story can be. So there's that enormous amount of work just on our own side, but also financial side of us paying for all of these things. When John and Chris became involved, they brought a certain amount of finance to keep us going. So we were able to keep filming and cutting for the next year. And it's a very small team. So it's like, a little bit of money goes a long way. After that point, it starts getting a bit more expensive because, you need to bring in other editors and you need archive producers and you need motion graphics people and you need all of composers, lawyers.
Especially for this one.
You definitely need a lot of lawyers. So all of that stuff required a lot more funding. We're very fortunate in Australia that we have certain tax incentives to help support people in filmmaking. And so we were able to access that once you sort of hit certain thresholds. So that added to our budget at that point. And that is, it's not automatic, but it's as long as you sort of, fit the criteria, then that money is available to you. Other sorts of funding, when you get to like, more direct government grants and things like that, that is more on an application basis. And it took a lot of work to sort of kind of convince, those various agencies that this was something that should be supported. There's not a lot of this level of premium documentary made in Australia, and particularly also because we're covering an American story. So there was less of an issue that, the subject matter might be seen as being controversial or anything like that. I don't recall there ever being like any issue with that side of it, but definitely an issue in the sense like the Australian government is putting money into a story that is largely an American story, but it happens to be made by Australian creatives.
Yeah,
Right.
like a huge part of our production, obviously, as we were talking about, like takes place in the edit. So we had a full Australian team. Well, we did have our editor, a few editors in London, but like our full, our assistant editor, we were all in Australia. I'm also cinematographers,
sound
were
designer,
Australian.
music composer.
So it's still employing a lot of Australians as well. But also the whole point of this project and kind of just some of our experience in wanting to do it is that it's not an American story. It's not an Australian story. It's a global story. This is something that everyone can connect with. It doesn't have to be, sometimes we also get the questions of, why is an Australian, and I'm also Australian and Canadian, why are they making this American story? But also having that kind of outside perspective to look in had allowed us to be objective in that sense and to be able to tell a story that is more interconnected to the rest of the world. So that was also kind of our pitch to some of the agencies. It might not be on the surface look like an Australian film, but this will connect with Australian audiences as it will connect with the rest of the world.
Yeah, that was definitely a big part of it. But yeah, coming into like Texas in particular, is its own world even within America. It gave us a certain outside perspective, so that certain things that would come up, like you read the headline news, blah blah blah, this thing has happened. And what we sort of discovered is that there's a lot of like mechanisms, legal mechanisms that sort of cause these things to happen way down the track. So an example of that we discovered, which I'd never really heard of before, was civil asset forfeiture. Now, this is something that is probably taken as common knowledge within Texas, but it's the particular mechanisms that operate within Texas that I think have really horrible consequences and lead to things like racial profiling or, dog false alerts and things like that. There's a certain incentivization of policing that drives these things to happen, and that law exists in a lot of other countries around the world, but not specifically the way that it does exist in Texas, where it directly benefits that police station. I met with this FBI agent who was investigating this at the time because there was a cop that was seizing millions of dollars, right? And he was just basically hunting people on the street, pulling people over for anything. Oh, your brake light looks like it's faded. Oh, I think you were swerving, whatever. Pulls them over just to see, and it was just a numbers game. If he pulls over 50 cars an hour, right, chances are one person might have something, and then he seizes the car. Then he seizes the money they've got on them, right? So he's churning all of this, but then the system is then giving him kickbacks because he's seizing so much for the state, right? And the FBI investigated this and ultimately came to the conclusion, actually, it's completely legal.
Which is insane.
Which is wild.
Not only are you like profiteering, like the prisons are profiting off of people in there for minor drug offenses, but the people that put them in the prison are also profiting directly from them. Like, wasn't part of like the Yolanda case that they just like stole money out of her house or something?
She had how much money on her at the time that they
She had like
seized?
$5,000 or maybe $8,000 or something.
I think she'd just sold a car.
That's right.
Yeah. And so it was just cash. She sold
It's
a
theirs
car.
now.
Yeah.
That's
and
their
boom.
money. Even if you get out of jail, you're not getting it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely innocent. And it's like you don't have the money to fight them for what will cost you more than the money you're going to get back. And hence why there's a certain incentivization to say target people who most likely don't have, a lawyer on speed dial who's going to protect them in any way, right? So you might have, farm workers or, who also get paid in cash, right? Who are a great target because they're not going to complain, they're not going to rock up to the court, and they've got easy assets that can be seized. I'm pretty sure that Australia has civil asset forfeiture, but it's very different when that item they're seized has to be directly involved in the crime itself, i.e.,
it can't just be like, oh, well, she had money. That could have been for other illegal things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is broad, but also when it is seized, it's seized broadly by the government and redistributed afterwards versus directly incentivizing those police on the street.
Yeah.
And so, like, coming into this, like, I'm not, I didn't want to have some political statement of like, oh, all cops are bad and all that sort of thing. Like, this is not a police bashing, documentary. There's no intention for it to be that way either.
But I'm saying it right here, right now. No, I'm just kidding.
But I do believe that these certain incentives, as well as the fact that a lot of these cops are really paid an incredibly low amount of money for what is a very, very risky job,
right,
is the foundation of how you see these problems happen.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense that Barry would try to take this head on from the outside, because I feel like a large theme that's being explored in narrative, film and TV, but not also, but like nonfiction too, is that like, it's basically impossible to fight the system from the inside because you just end up becoming the system. So there really isn't any like opportunity to actually correct the thing that you thought was an injustice in the beginning, because it's, yeah, like these things are terrible, but like when you get into the inner logic of those police, they could be thinking like, well, this is just normal. This is how it's supposed to be done. Why would this be considered, illegal or immoral or anything like that? So with documentary subjects, I feel like you have to nail what they're about in the first 5 minutes, because the audience is going to make up their mind pretty much immediately if they like the main subject or not. I've been through docs. You were talking about the one where like, does the doc work well, the subject work well on camera? And I've seen a few docs where like clearly the person that is the main topic of the story does not want to be there, but they agreed. They signed the paperwork, so they're there, and you're watching the finished product, and you're like, I think this guy just wants to go home. I don't think he wants to bring up getting arrested for fraud or whatever. So it's one of the, like, there are a number of highs that you get as a documentary filmmaker, and that's one of them. When someone agrees and you can tell that there is like a trust, then they're going to be open about it. And it's just like, okay, great. Cause then it's just like, it fuels so many more further steps down the line.
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's like trust is obviously a huge thing. And that's why, we spent a lot of time with all of them talking a lot before the interview. It's also just the personality. Some people just have a certain way they carry themselves, a certain way that they speak. We were very fortunate that pretty much everyone we interview, I'm like, wow, you're born for the camera. You just have like a really particular personality or way you phrase things. Some people are just natural storytellers. And, you could have someone talking to you about the most explosive thing that's ever happened in, you know, the US government, right? But they may not be very charismatic. Or you could have someone telling you a story about how they dropped their kids off at school, and it's fascinating because they just know how to capture your attention and to, you know, turn a phrase or turn a story or, you know, build tension at certain points. Like that's the craft of storytelling. And then you get to take those raw elements and improve them again when you start cutting it together.
Isn't the coolest shot effect just like the greatest thing ever? Like the fact that you can just make that association, especially in documentary, of being like, it's not always like subject says a thing, cut to the thing. It can be like subject can be saying something and then you just cut to something unrelated. But the way that like subliminally the brain works, it just associates it, and you can get a lot of leeway and get away with. I kind of like to refer to my finished edit as being held together by duct tape, because that's what it feels like, you know. Like I can sit there and see the cracks, but the audience might not necessarily. So you always have to deal with that dichotomy of being able to step back and watch it as an audience member who hasn't sat there and like heard the same sound bites over and over again in the same order over and over again. Like actually, I think it got to a point where like when I was doing the audio, like I don't remember exactly what I did, but I think I just started muting the dialogue because I knew it was mixed, and I was like, I don't want to hear it anymore. I just need to know if the music is at the right volume and if it ends at the right spot, because I can't hear him say that thing that he said that I've heard. Like it was great when he said it the first time, but on, you know, number 399, it's starting to drive me a little crazy, especially like the front 15 of your doc, you know? So yeah, it's a lot.
Objectivity is really hard. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's also the kind of exciting part about like kind of getting to that point of the collaboration, like Simon Walbrook, our composer as well, and just having this post-production team that, you know, you've built the story, you're starting to build, they're still building the story. And then you get another person come onto the team to elevate it as well. So like early on from the process, music was such a huge thing for this project. Even in the teaser that we built, some of the tracks that we wanted, we just like, that was a huge kind of thematic that we wanted to kind of portray throughout the project. And then when we found Simon, our composer, he just also took this to another level of like in the edit to like elevate the whole project. And it was such like a fantastic addition to the team. And, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want to hear that sound, or I don't want to do this anymore. It just re-energizes the whole project once again.
Yeah, it refreshes you. Like a lot of filmmakers hate test screenings. Like it's just torture. And it is torture because it reveals everything to you about your film that's not quite great. But that is the best thing you can possibly have at certain moments when you're ready for it, when you're at a point where you're like, I think the story's working. You know, I think it's worth showing to people at this point to sort of get that feedback of what it is. So we had 2 test screenings.
Yeah, I think we did about 2 or 3 test screenings throughout kind of the years of making it, and trying to kind of keep that group of people a bit more diverse as well in terms of age and demographic backgrounds, just to kind of get a feel in the room. Sometimes the feedback might not be always what you're looking for, but when you're in the room, you know, you can feel what was getting a laugh, or I don't know, just as like the filmmaker as well, you just know there's something that's happening in that test screening. You're like, oh, I don't want people to see this, or like, I think we need to cut this down. It's just feeling too long. So it's such a huge, part of, I would always want to do that if I have the opportunity.
Oh, look, I would love to avoid it like the plague, but I think it's a very important part of the process.
It's a double-sided
your film gets a lot better because of it.
Yeah.
You can't hide in a test screening, and any of those moments where it's even less about their feedback itself and it's more about how you feel, because you've lost all objectivity because like you said, you've seen that same person say that same thing 399 times. But being in a room, it just refreshes you immediately. You're now just an audience member like everybody else. And all those moments where you're like, oh, just, stick with it. It's going to get better. You know that there's a pacing issue or an information issue, or maybe that scene just shouldn't even be in it at all. Like we had a whole section which was all about police training early on. And it was really, really fun. Like it was, the police training should be fun, but it was like a really fun put together sequence.
Barry Cooper makes it fun.
It makes it fun.
If you want that, you can go watch the original Never Get Busted that C.R. Koltenthaler directed and edited.
Yeah.
Because there is a whole section on that.
Which is like, as a scene, it's an awesome scene. And really late in the cut, when we were discussing it, particularly between Erin, myself, and Julian, was like, I don't think we need it, because if you think about the arc of the story is cop breaks bad, right? It's like good old American boy, kind of police officer, straight and narrow, flips to the other side and becomes an activist, right? Effectively, right? What the story's not about is, you know, a guy in the country who decides to become a police officer and then flips over, right? Because that's 2 steps. So you want this sort of single arc, which makes it much cleaner. And so for that period of it, even though the scene is great, there's a certain pacing of the audience who's like, okay, when are we going to get to the real story? Because that's not what I'm here for.
But at least you lucked out with that one in particular, because a lot of those details are just reveal themselves through osmosis anyway. Like just from showing clips of the documentary that they made, and you know, just whatever he says in his interviews, you know, in modern day it'll all eventually reveal itself. And you know, the police training thing is kind of just like, you sort of understand that like everything that he's going to tell you, he was trained to, you know, use against you, or in the past.
Yeah, there's some presumed knowledge as well that, you know, after doing different reviews, you're like, okay, I think the audience is already kind of aware of that information, so you are kind of condensing it throughout the process. But yeah, it's a kind of difficult position as well, and there's versus a series versus a feature, it also allows you to kind of spend more time in different areas.
Right. Well, it's also like you were talking about how test audiences, you want to keep them diverse to get a different range of opinions, but like it really does depend on if you have that much control over it or not, because you know, if you're going to do your test screen here in LA, it's people that have seen how many movies in their life, and you know, documentaries, especially, the language is becoming so much more commonplace in pop culture. So I feel like, yeah, you are sort of able to sort of rely on that. Like, you don't need to go full like David Simon, you know, and just be like, they'll figure it out. Like, no, you need to give them a little bit of a lead, but then, you know, eventually if you give them enough, there's certain stuff that they can fill in the blanks of. And like, you know, like it bothers me sometimes when like a filmmaker will do something about the internet and they're like, for example, the QAnon documentary that was on HBO. Great documentary,
amazing.
right?
Yeah,
Amazing.
big
Cullen
fan.
Hoback is great.
Q into the storm.
But I cannot get over the fact that every time they said the word LARP, they had to put the definition on screen. I'm like, I know what LARPing is. I've been on the internet for 20 years. But again, it's for normies. It's for people that don't know all of that. So at least this is in the you know, situation of Never Get Busted, it's a lot more universal of a thing. Like whether or not you do smoke marijuana yourself or whatever, you know people that do, or it could even just be translated to alcohol or any other type of, you know, harder drug. At least in terms of like the harmlessness of marijuana, it's very understandable that like it is just a plant. Like, why is this? But it's because they're using that as their sort of catalyst to dig for more stuff that they will get even more accolades.
It's not about drugs. It's about seizing assets, and it's about money. Like ultimately, that's the interesting thing about it, because we're not from America. So like, you know, politically speaking, a lot of documentaries, you know, lean one way or the other. You know, it's for Republicans, it's for Democrats, and that's not our agenda at all. Like to me, if there's anything that both sides can really get around, is that I don't think anyone is pro-corruption. Like I don't think either side is pro-corruption.
Right.
And to me, that is like the real foundation of the story, that it's not a story about, you know, a weed activist, right?
Well, it's more specifically is that he is like, there's a difference between like genuinely believing in something and then being a grifter that is just taking advantage of something that they know will yield them attention and fame and all that. I think Barry, his story is unique because he was like right at the end of the like DVD era. Like, yes, they were still making DVDs after YouTube came around, but if he could have just uploaded Never Get Busted to YouTube in like 2006, there was only like 10 videos on the website. So it probably would have done pretty well. Mm-hmm. And their community guidelines were basically non-existent, at least, you know, compared to what they are now. So, you know, who knows how bigger he could have become had he waited like another year. But it's also like, you know, we talk about Chris Smith, an American movie, and even going back to the original Never Get Busted doc, it's kind of just amazing that any of this is able to really exist in the way that it does and find its audience because of the technology and the place that it's in. Like, you watch American movie And it's a fucking nightmare because he has to cut the entire 16 millimeter thing by hand.
You gotta find each missing piece and tape this in. That's what I mean. You go to a movie, you see this. You don't pay to see that. What the fuck is supposed to occur here?
And you're like, man, if you had just waited like 2 more years, you could have scanned it into Avid and like your life would have been so much less stressful. But he just wanted to get Coven done. So I get it. You can have so many tools as a filmmaker, at least in terms of like the language, the technical aspects and all that. But like when I was making my documentary, I was like, how the hell am I going to sort out all of this information? Because it's just hours and hours of text. Like, how am I supposed to get any of this into a cohesive thing? And I was like looking for these like third-party services where they're like, oh, well, we'll transcribe your thing and, you know, you can find it there. And then I was like, how am I going to cross-reference this? But what was amazing was that as I was making An Elegant Weapon, Premiere added that into the software. And I was like, holy shit, this is a game changer, because now I can just type in a word and then go right to the thing and copy and paste it. And like, it was like one of my biggest concerns is I was like, I know that when I get towards the end, I'm going to need to go into everything and be like, what did I miss? Because there's going to be little stuff that you're going to be like, oh, I have to have that. How did I miss that? And that would not have been possible, or at least it would have taken me so much longer as a one-man team without that. So, you know, it's a interesting place that documentaries are in right now, because it's becoming a lot easier for people to make them at a higher quality. But it's also like, that just means that there's more of them out there, and it makes it a more competitive space. So that puts you guys in the position you're in, where you're kind of you have to sort of, I mean, it's a bit of a morbid term, but kill your babies when it comes to your art. And like, when it comes to, you know, audiences now all have these expectations of what documentaries are supposed to look and feel like, especially because of Tiger King and all the, you know, the pop docs, right? So whenever you're making your own thing, you're having to sort of balance that between like, what are people going to expect when they click on this, you know, on Netflix or YouTube in my case. And then it's like, what part of it do I want to be like, no, this is my art. Don't touch my art. I'm doing it the way I want to do it. If you don't like it, there's a million other documentaries out there that aren't about other things if you really want to complain. But
I'm more of a pragmatist than that, honestly. Like, I don't really see it that way. Like film is just such an incredibly expensive medium that I think it really exists somewhere between art and commerce, right? You know, and like, hats off to those people who can just be like pure artists within it. But I think that's really, really difficult.
Especially now.
I think
when without Chris Smith didn't have the algorithm in 1997.
He didn't have the
Like,
algorithm.
I'm making my story.
But it was harder in different ways then because of the technology. If anyone wants to go be a filmmaker, you can be a filmmaker tomorrow, right? You can just go and do it. Nobody can stop you. You literally have a camera, you know, in your pocket that you can do it with. The technology is out there. It's free. It's blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, that's only at a certain scale. Right. And if you want to do stuff at a bigger scale, then there is commercial pressure, like to hit those sort of things. And I personally don't find that a hindrance. Like, I find that just like, you know, kind of an extra,
like a guideline.
Not incentive's not the right word, but it helps you push your craft.
It's a good challenge to have as well.
Yeah. I want to engage people.
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, coming from obviously like a business background as well and a sales background, it's super helpful in the edit as well to be creative and have that business mindset. And similarly, David, we know, was a producer as well. So we're both coming at it in, a combination of an artistic and business way in order to be able to appeal to, you know, a global audience. But yeah, there is a lot of challenges in order to kind of stand out. And like you said, you know, some of the standards are being set, more people are watching it, the space is, you know, crowded. But from a filmmaking perspective, it's kind of a fun challenge. Okay, well, you know, we've seen so many people with, you know, a background with just like a white background. Like, what can we do that's something different? And on this, like, we had so much intention of wanting each subject to have their background also say something about them. So that was a huge thing going in. We're like, I haven't really seen much of that. I've seen some of documentaries do a bit of that. I haven't seen like these really crazy extravagant backgrounds that say something about the subject as well. So I'm like, why not? Why don't we do that? We don't necessarily have the resources to hire production design to do that.
Right.
But that's something that David and I took on as well. You know, we're location scouting, and we're like, okay, that's a really cool place. I think that could, you know, say a little bit about this character. So when someone switches on and we see Travis, for example, and that's in his own space, you know, he's got his monitors in the background, the edit room's there.
3 PM on one of his 18 monitors. Yeah.
Exactly.
And Teenagers from Outer Space, which is where the name C.R. Coltenthaler came from.
That's right.
Exactly. So he's got that in the background. I remember him specifically searching to make sure that was in the public domain so that could be on in the background. And it was. But that's just like an immediate. So also it's harder and harder, obviously, to captivate audiences these days. And audiences are super smart too. So similarly, you know, we don't want to spoon feed information as well. Like we want to be able to tell a story that someone's going to be engaged with. So having, you know, just switching on and seeing Travis, you're like, oh my gosh, who is this person? Like I kind of know who he is a little bit, but I want to like lean in a bit more and find out something the more about this subject because of that extra element of production design. It's a tiny thing, but I believe, you know, you don't see it as often, and it's something that we can do to step out of the box maybe a little bit and to, you know, make it more interesting and engaging.
Yeah, there's like, I originally studied graphic design. And I remember the first lecture that I went to, and they really hammered you on form follows function. So whatever it is that you're trying to do, like how you express that, it has to have something to do with that fundamental idea of what you're trying to achieve. So there's a lot of wild stuff in this like documentary, like on artistically, like we really, really pushed it. You know, it's very graphical, like the locations are all very specifically chosen, the way people dress, the music, the sound, like there's bits of animation, like we've really, really gone for it, even how it's graded and treated, right? So those are all artistic choices that you make as filmmakers, but they all come from the idea that like this is a wild story. Like this is the wildest story certainly I've ever heard. So it's not like we're doing all of that stuff and just kind of painting it on top of something that is otherwise a fairly banal story. It's like, no, it's a wild story, and so it should be presented wild. It bumps and grinds. It's not a smooth sort of journey. And I think that's where both the art and craft come in, your ability to be able to achieve it, but also the idea of what it is that you want the audience to feel and experience in it and how you want to affect them emotionally is really the main skill of filmmakers, right? Is to engage them, tell them a story that they take away with them, but also affect them emotionally where it's, you know, there's nothing like being in a room and there's like 400 strangers in there watching your film and they all experience that exact emotion at the exact same time. Like that is like the peak of, you know, what you can achieve in filmmaking. It's
very special. It's like, yeah, when we like at Sundance and in LA in the screening and just hearing people laugh at something that we've been, I'm like, is that still funny? Like we've seen that scene so many times. I'm like, are they going to laugh at it? And then hearing it, like 400 people laughing, I'm like, oh my gosh, it did. It's you know, other people are connecting to it in a way that we also intended it to be. So it's super exciting moment.
It's a very funny doc, like more than you would expect going in. Like, I mean, I already knew that Travis had the capacity to make me laugh just from the way that he is and the way he talks. But like, yeah, it can go between like the outlandish, you know, and then just like the deadpan humor. Like I think even Joe Commander probably got a few laughs, or the other cop, I can't remember his name, but you never know how it's gonna work until, yeah, especially with comedy. Like that's probably got to be the hardest thing. Like, is this gonna work? So I think maybe I cheated a little bit in my doc where I was just like, this is most of what's gonna keep people engaged. I think is the humorous stuff. Is like, you know, we can sit here and just give you all this nerdy information about, you know, amateur filmmaking and lightsabers and you know, philosophy and all that, but then, you know, it's also funny to watch a guy get hit by his own van and be like, did we get it? You know, like, I think there's also an aspect of it where like, yeah, you are the first audience member. So like, yeah, if it appeals to you, then there's probably, yeah, you know, I think what I'm trying to say is like, I think that like the elevator pitch for this is really what is going to help set it apart from other stuff in the sphere is that like, he was a cop, he turned anti-cop. He was putting people in jail for weed. Now he's trying to get them out of jail over weed, or in Yolanda's case, it was like crystal meth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just hearing that, your lizard brain goes like, oh shit, what's up? Like, I need to hear more. Like, what? And it is just its own saga, and it's crazy that y'all were working on this before I'd even reached out to Travis for my thing. So again, it's just this weird synchronicity in the universe that these docs existed around the same time. And obviously Travis isn't the main character of Never Get Busted, but the fact that he was included made me one of the movie's biggest cheerleaders, because I was like, holy shit, I know this guy, and these stories overlap, and people that could, and this might be a little selfish to think, but what if people see the lightsaber things and they're like, what's that about? Then, hey, guess what? I got a whole 2.5 hour documentary that'll tell you everything and probably way more than you'd want to know. That was probably one of the notes I took from myself afterwards, watching it a year or two after the fact, is being like, this is really blabby. You really just gotta. I thought what I put out was the simplified version, but you got to make it even simpler than that. I think, at least, But that was my first doc. That was I basically taught myself how through the process of figuring out how you do it, but also just watching a whole bunch of docs when I wasn't working, also just to avoid carpal tunnel. But yeah, I think it's just exciting to be able to be on that side of it. And what a lot of people will say is that making a movie is a hard thing to do, but that's usually applied to fiction. I feel like it's even harder to make a documentary, because like you were saying at the beginning, when you have a narrative, you have a script, you know exactly what everyone's going to say and every element that needs to be on screen at that point in time before you show up to set. But with a documentary, yeah, you can be 2 or 3 years in, and then some guy is like, hey, by the way, that's me. You might want to talk to me. I have a couple things you might want to know, since this is the title of your fucking documentary. My question was there ever a point where you considered not titling it Never Get Busted? Was there ever what were some of the other titles you guys threw around?
That's a good question.
Good question.
That's taking me back.
Very early on, definitely, I think we were thinking about different titles.
And I can't even remember what.
From Cop to Criminal, the Barry Cooper story.
I don't know.
I remember there was a byline at a point, was Misadventures in the War on Drugs.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember, I think we had 5, 6 other titles running at the time. And then we just kept coming back to it. And eventually it was it just feels like it has to be. Because it asks a question. There's something about that title, which obviously Barry and Travis knew when they did it. It asks a question, never get busted from what? You know what I mean? Or do
just
they get,
never.
Or do they get busted? You know what I mean? There's it's already got a certain tension and curiosity.
It's not how to never get busted. It's just telling you never get busted.
It's telling you, is it a statement?
And then he'll
is it a
explain.
question? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great title. I mean, I kudos to them for coming up with it at the start. It just answers everything, I think.
I had to struggle to find out. I'm like, what the fuck am I going to call this lightsaber documentary? And then I just went back to that first line with Obi-Wan, where he's like, it's an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. And I'm like, yeah, this is a movie of people talking about a fictional weapon. I think you're not going to get a better title than that. But hopefully your guys' thing blows up and gets more than, 4,000 views on YouTube. Maybe not worth the 2.5 years of effort, but you know what? For me, it was I wanted to know the answer, and I got the answer. But then I was like, other people are going to need to know, and I got to put it in a little package to where they can digest it, because they're not going to find all these unlisted videos and all this stuff that Travis is gracious enough to present me with. So I think
also I think success, something learning is it is so many different versions of what success is as well, and making something, and getting audience reactions or being on a big streamer, everything like that. I don't know. I just like to think of success in very different kind of pathways to that. So whether it gets the massive, audience reach that you want it to have, or whether it gave you all that experience to make the next thing, it's there's still success within, built with everything that you create. So I think there's always a space to take what you've learned and make something even bigger as well.
And I feel proud of, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming you guys feel proud of your work, but
sure.
Even if nobody sees it, I'm like, yeah, I did ultimately end up making the movie for me. So, I mean, and it's also now I can walk around and say, hey, I'm a documentary filmmaker. Check out this thing. Check out this YouTube link, which, you know, most people would go, oh, I thought you said you were a documentary filmmaker, not a YouTube guy. I'm like, well, it's about YouTube kind of. So, I mean, it ultimately, like, I did have a point where I was like, do I need to go the professional route and pitch this and do all this stuff? But then I was like, who's going to buy it? Like, I know that's not a great attitude to have, but like, it's pragmatism, like you said. I'm aware of how the world works, and I know what is in the popular sphere. And hey, you remember these lightsaber shorts from 20 years ago? Like, no one gives a shit. Like, there's like a handful of us that do, which is great. And the people that I made it for, I got a great response from. So that was nice. But like, I think that's the ultimate trick, right? Is like you found your gym that's gonna take you through the wild world of documentary. And
I think it's both though. I mean, funnily enough, you know, a friend of mine at film school used to make those like lightsaber videos as well. And
that was how I got my start. That was literally how I learned editing was from those lightsaber tutorials and being like, oh, okay, if I take a picture of this Lego Yoda in this pose and then the next pose and the next pose, and then I put a lightsaber on it, and then it just, you know, you go from Windows Movie Maker to Premiere in a span of 15 years.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what this, you know, we were considered to be like the, you know, the editors, the post kind of people at film school. And, you know, he's gone off and been incredibly successful, like, you know, editing massive movies from that. So, you know, shout out to Sean Laheef, I guess. But, you know, like it's about like what you learn through the process as well. Cause I think if you're going to ever be like a really good, ideally great filmmaker, then each one of those things that you make is a stepping stone. I don't think any great filmmaker ever walks away from the film and go, perfect.
Right.
Don't change a pixel. Right. That shouldn't ever happen. You should always be like, okay, so how do I stretch myself further? Like, what's my next challenge? Like, how do I, you know, what did I learn from this? What was great about it? But like also, what did I maybe not get correct that I could do better next time? Or even just go into a different genre or a different way of making it, but constantly challenging yourself. So it doesn't really matter, you know, I started off making little shorts and short documentaries, and, you know, I worked in animation for quite a while, and I learned everything from all these different things. One of my first big jobs was in reality TV, and I was an assistant editor first. And a lot of people might, you know, in the more rarefied world of like feature films might think of reality TV as being a bit like trashy or something. But I tell you what, from a crafts perspective, it's tough. Right. You've got to really be on point in terms of your storytelling and the speed at which you review stuff and are able to immediately look at a piece of material and go, yep, that's in the cut. That's in the moment. Look at that little moment that person had there. That says this. And it does train you in a different way. And then going into animation trains you in a very, very different way again, because like everything is very much pre-made. You know, it's storyboarded, it's cut together already, it's voiced already. And so then the animation is just really like the last piece. And documentary is the opposite again, where it's just you're gathering heaps of stuff and then you're doing the storytelling afterwards, and you're hoping that you have a great story to tell at the end.
Yeah, and just having like the tenacity as a filmmaker across any format, you know, documentary or narrative or anything like that, that's a huge part of it. I think that kind of gets underlooked. Like, you may have a lot of haters along the way and people that don't support you. And how do you persevere through that? Some, you know, especially in documentary, where sometimes you're financially taking it all on yourself and you've got such a small team and you've got other people that are telling you, yeah, you can't do this or this isn't going to be any good. Like, I believe in it, you believe in it, so should we still do this? But, you know, there's so many challenges that you have with the people around you. So when you do have that tenacity to continuously go and work on this for 6 years, it's, you kind of, yeah, you want to obviously be proud of it in the end. And I'm super proud of, you know, what we've made. And it's just taken incredible amount of tenacity. And that's something that I've, you know, definitely learned throughout the process, is just, like pushing yourself and learning from all those experiences, and learning from the people that don't want to support you, learning from the people that do want to support you and who you want to work with in the future as well. So there's so many different speed bumps that you can encounter, but finding that audience and finding those people that really support you, like, that's everything. That collaboration is so exciting and so fun. And, it's hard to find. It's hard to find those incredible collaborators. And we were lucky, for on a few cases as well. And yeah, it's just been a really long journey, but super proud of, what it is.
Oh,
And
I think
people,
it's awesome, like, end result. I think it's a great, fun ride. It's funny. It's dramatic. It's got tension, and it's got something to say about the world that we live in.
Right.
But to your point, I remember watching an interview with Ridley Scott. I mean, one of the great filmmakers of all time, and
Talking about characters.
And his main advice to filmmakers was that it takes an inordinate amount of stamina to be a filmmaker. Like, nobody wants you doing this. You have to, like, always be self-driving.
Well, that was something they taught us in film school. Is they were like, you guys know that this is like one of the few industries that like could disappear tomorrow and the world wouldn't change, like, to an extent, it does, like.
I mean, I highly disagree with that, but yeah.
I at least in terms of pragmatism and survival of the human race, I guess we don't necessarily.
I'm not sure
need
about
cinema.
that though. I think it can sometimes be treated that way, say, compared to people who work in. I don't know, looking at all these buildings being built here, they build shelter. People who, farmers and people who work in restaurants and things like that, or hospital workers, but. It's not just entertainment as pastime. It's actually how we pass on information to everybody. We tell stories. Like, it is one of the most fundamental things about humans. It's how we communicate. It's how we store vital information. You could tell someone a whole bunch of facts and they will not remember anything about it. But you combine that into a great story and they'll remember that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. No, I've always, like, I definitely, like, during COVID was when I really got into documentaries. And so I would, like, literally just, like, find something that I thought the topic would be interesting, and I'd hit play and I'd go, okay, educate me. Like that was my whole goal. And I think that is, it is like, I would hate for movies obviously to disappear, because then what would I do in this world, I think there is, certainly with documentaries, there's a lot more of an opportunity to educate and learn about the world as an audience member that you might not, if, you're watching Marvel movie number 48 or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I've had that argument many times. I mean, Australia and, certain other countries, Canada's like this as well, that, the government co-funds artistic ventures, whether through tax incentives or grants or whatever. And there's often an argument to say, like, why do we do this? But I say to people, I tell you what, you go 1 month without art and you tell me whether art's worthwhile. And when I say that, I mean, go without, a chef is an artist. Like, you go to, like, a great restaurant, that's an artist. Your designer clothes, music, cut that out, right? Don't watch anything on TV. Take away all of these things, right?
even books.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% books, podcasts, whatever. You take all of that out of your life and you tell me whether it's important in a month.
I think it is. I think it's
I think
important.
it is too.
I would probably, within 24 hours, I'd be like, going crazy. So, I mean, it would be great if it wasn't as competitive as it is, especially in this digital age. Like we were talking about, how anyone can pick up a camera and make a movie. And, an aspect of it is luck. It's that, and it's also like, who do you know? And luckily you guys knew the exact right people to bring this thing.
It got to the right people,
Yeah.
like eventually. But I do have a certain amount of faith that there's a lot of people making stuff, but there is a enormous amount that you need to learn in terms of like the craft of being like a great storyteller. And that I still think that is somewhat rare. And I think it's worth a lot.
Yeah. When it came to like the legal documents and like the police stuff, did you have to file like FOIA requests or inquiries?
Yeah, we did a few FOIA requests, some that another layer of the story that's not in this story we did for, but also for a lot of the Yolanda and Raymond documents. They already had a lot of those documents, which we were fortunate to have, because as you kind of can see in the documentary, that the huge process that Raymond went through before Barry came, and like trying to appeal and everything. Like, so he already had all of that in his possession. So that was, really great to have in terms of access. But other kind of legal requests, yeah, we sent them through, but part of that also would be in like a follow-up of some of the materials and some of the other kind of things that happen. I'm like skirting around different things.
I get you. No, I get it.
There is a whole, like kind of we're alluding to, there is another documentary basically that is incredibly its own, Making Murderer Again. So there was a lot of FOIA requests in that case. So we have some of that, but for this, we're fortunate that Raymond had a bunch of those documents, and we worked with lawyers and our archival producer, of course, throughout the process to get us as much information as possible to obviously fact check it, make sure everything, that we're saying, we're exposing this, injustice that happens. So there's quite, you need to be fairly certain that all this information is correct. So having that support, from our archival producers and legals, super necessary in the process.
I feel like we should explain a bit about the Yolanda story. So
that's true, yeah.
So it makes a little bit of sense. So, I mean, Yolanda's story, she was a single mom in West Texas who, through effectively a case of mistaken identity, had methamphetamine planted on her by the police in what's called an informant plant. And this is an incredibly illegal thing for the police to do. But it was a way for them to essentially pull her over and find these drugs that had been planted on her and arrest her for it.
Right.
Thinking that she was, and to take the cash, but really thinking that she was this local meth dealer called the Ice Queen, which she was not. But once they realized their mistake, they weren't really able to backtrack out of it. And so it really felt like an incredibly egregious case of the entire justice system, like doubling down on her. And even though the informant who had planted the drugs on her admitted to it in court, she was still sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. So her dad, who has become a hero of mine, and when he told us his full story when we met with him, essentially said, like, I'm going to get her out because right is right, and I'm going to prove that these cops did all this dirty stuff, and I'm going to get her out of prison. He wasn't able to. So he had appeal after appeal. He did everything like the regular way, called the FBI, the works, couldn't get anywhere. And that's when he found out about Barry Cooper, and they teamed up to set these crooked cops up and prove that they were using illegal tactics, and essentially to try and get a retrial for Yolanda. One of the most amazing things that he said to us when we spoke to him, I thought, you've gone through all this. Like, he took so much risks. Like, the police obviously weren't happy with what he was doing. They threatened him a bunch.
They would just show up to his house and start like just to be there. Not even like we're going to come up to the front door and want to talk to you. It's just like pure intimidation tactics.
Pure intimidation. And it said to him, you should shut the hell up because what happened to your daughter can happen to you, right? A very direct threat against him. And after him telling me all of this, I said, like, Raymond, like, you know, like, why did you keep going? Like, why weren't you concerned? Like, you know,
why didn't you want to move?
Why didn't you want to move? And he said, not in my town. I thought, man, this guy is the most badass person. And it took that kind of person to be able to stand up towards an incredible injustice.
Dad of the Year for sure award.
Dad of the Millennium.
Yeah.
Millennium.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we talked about the animation briefly. Who did you guys commission for that?
There's a company in Australia called Vicious Productions. I'd worked with them a bunch in the past on other animated series. So in a previous life, I ran a post-production company, and we worked on, I'm trying to think now, probably about 5-6 animated TV series with them. So had a great relationship with them, obviously, and just knew that they were the right people.
So they gave you a good rate.
They did give a good
They
rate
gave you a
as well.
discount.
They did give a discount as well. But more so, Luke Jerevicius, who's the animation director there, he's just like an incredible talent, talent.
And some of that like inspiration, I think, well, because you've seen it, where in the first animation where, you know, Barry kind of, you know, it's the first time he's ever smoked weed, and then that's when we kind of get taken into animation. And they're like flying on this like rainbow. And
that was my favorite one, by the way.
That was kind of inspired by the scene in Anchorman where they also have a moment and then they kind of go into this magical land and there's this rainbow. And then also the scene in the Tenacious D, what's the Jack Black?
The movie?
Yeah, in the movie, where he kind of has this like trip and then he's in this like magical land. I'm like, what if we could kind of have, a little bit of comedy as well into this moment of the first time he's ever smoked weed, this, straight-laced cop and this magical kind of world. So that was also another fun kind of area that we played with Luke, and he really helped deliver that project.
Yes. I mean, that idea of like using animation in that way was like right back from the start when we were first researching it, and I'd like was scribbling down notes of like how this thing could come together.
Yeah.
And I'd write like animation is a must.
I think, it's just like the comedy was just, it was never an afterthought. It was like, as soon as we saw the project, like I'm just a huge fan of comedy as well. And there was just so much, like it's a war on drugs documentary, but it's funny. It's kind of a hard pitch for people to understand.
Right.
But, like some of, some inspirations like Adam McKay, like Edgar Wright's one of my favorite directors as well. And, all these people and how they've used, Adam McKay is a great example of like using, these big topics and these big worlds and important messages, but also doing it through comedy. And that was such a really fun tool to play with throughout the process. Animation, I think, really allowed us to kind of be even more, silly in that space.
Well, it's also just a nice creative way to be able to visually demonstrate something that you don't have footage for.
For sure.
Like, it's also, it works two ways because you're able to convey an emotion that you wouldn't necessarily be able to through archive footage or the coolest shop effect or whatever. And like, it reminded me of, have you guys seen the doc Feels Good Man? About Matt Fury and Pepe the Frog. She's seen
Pieces
it.
of it.
You gotta watch it.
Okay, yeah.
But it's really well done, and a lot of the because again, there's not a lot of footage or really any of when he was going through it, watching his art become co-opted by the alt-right and all that, and Donald Trump and the election and all this craziness. So the way that they sort of convey that in the movie is that they take Pepe the Frog, his character that he's trying to reclaim legally, and demonstrate through Pepe like what it would be like to be in his perspective. And and there's even a part where spoiler alert, he kills Pepe the Frog as part of a way to try to reclaim it, and they show they animate a funeral for Pepe. And so it's we were talking about the language documentaries, like using animation like that. I feel like I love the direction that documentaries are going into, where stuff like that is just so much more commonplace and acceptable. And animation is not cheap. It just isn't. Maybe it used to be, but now it's definitely not. So, I think you used it just the right amount, but it's also you didn't need to use any more of it than you had because Barry gave you 300 hours of all this crazy, never before seen footage. And to that, I was going to ask, was there anything that he gave you that, you think should be seen in full? Because, there was a documentary, Orson Welles' last movie, The Other Side of the Wind, was, 40 years in the can, and then they finally finished it. And they made a documentary about, they made two. They made one about them making the movie back in the 70s, and then they made one about, in modern day, cutting it together. And then there was a third supplementary thing that was just the conversation between Orson Welles and Dennis Hopper. And they're we only used 15 seconds of this in either version. But this is such an interesting conversation on its own that they were trying to put it out in film festivals. And I'll be honest, I saw it on some random Russian social media. I think one of them probably uploaded it. Was there anything that you received either from Barry or Travis or anywhere that you saw that and you were I wish that we could put this out as its own thing because it deserves to be seen start to finish?
Oh, I mean, that's such a good question. Where are you going to go with this, Erin?
There's so much archive that's not in the documentary. Obviously, we're talking about before, series versus feature, what you can keep and what you can't keep. There's footage of Barry in Mexico as well, and that side of things. There's also a lot of things that should not be seen by anyone else that only myself and the assistant editor have seen, and you can put that to the imagination. He shared everything with us. So,
he really did.
He really didn't hold back, is to say the least.
I would think one of the, probably in, what has been screened so far, there was a whole section on Barry also ran his own UFC.
Right.
Right.
That's, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
so there's the whole thing of him, early days of mixed martial art, fight competitions. he was the first person to host them in Texas. So he got the license to host them in Texas.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. So he put on these shows and they were like quite popular and he was doing well out of it, but he called it UFC. And so ultimately Dana White threatened to sue him to change the name, which he did change the name to XFC. And then he kind of got out of it. But it's just so wild because, you've got this great footage of Barry in this giant, he's in this white suit, in the ring and kind of introducing people. And there's like chopper motorbikes and, his daughters are carrying around like kind of the bout cards and all that sort of thing. I mean, but it's such a side story,
Right.
but it's just so.
There's no time for it, but
There's no time for it, but it's so
I would
fun.
love to see that actually.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny? I think that is actually how Barry ended up getting in touch with Travis. Was that
right.
there was a crew member that Barry was trying to get to shoot those fights that called Travis and said, "Hey, I can't do this. Can you do it?" And then Barry pitched the Never Get Busted doc to him. So,
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
so maybe you should have included it.
There's so many like plottings along the
yeah, I
way,
know.
and you
There's
just
so
gotta
much.
like,
Yeah.
The one other thing actually maybe that there's pieces of that is really crazy is he did start his own ayahuasca center in
course.
Mexico, as you do.
Yeah. If you're
And
Barry Cooper.
there's some pieces of that I'm like, this is just crazy. So yeah, little snippets.
That one's still around. I might
see.
hit up Mexico and
Yeah.
go on vacation.
He's lived 1,000 lives in one. He really has.
Absolutely. And I think was a huge, obviously, draw to this project as well. I'm a huge fan of documentaries that can tell a story through archive. I get really excited about that because it's kind of this exclusive access that, us as audiences get to be taken into this world. Having a combination of talking heads and archive also works too, but just something about being able to be there at that time is just so unique, and it's something that I think does separate you and separates your story from some others. Like one that came out a bit later, like Telemarketers. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
Yeah, I love that one.
It's
Incredible.
incredible,
Yeah.
and that's
Shout out to Pat Pespis.
so amazing, and the filmmaking of that was fantastic, and just similarly, like you're able to be a part of that story, and you just get. I find myself more immersed in those stories and being able to have that, interesting perspective versus like someone telling a story. Just having that extra element to it. I don't know. It's just super exciting.
It's real. Like you're in the scene versus someone saying, "Hey, this like crazy thing happened to me." Like you're in the scene, seeing it happen.
Or the BTS to Chris Smith doc, Jim and Andy. Like having all of that. Like that's also one of my favorite docs as well. I'm like, oh my God, I'm now a crew member experiencing all of this happening, and it's such incredible storytelling.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Apparently, that exists for Megalopolis. And apparently that's coming out. That's going to do the festival circuit this fall. So
Interesting.
I'm looking forward to that one because I've seen the finished movie, and I can only imagine from what we've heard, through the press, that's probably like Hearts of Darkness probably doesn't come close. Which I mean, same guys. So what are you gonna do? I really appreciate you guys sitting down to talk to me because I think kind of what I was trying to get at when I set this up is that like, when you are a documentary filmmaker and you go about the process of making your story, whatever format it ends up in, there's a story that you're putting together, and then there's your story. And I feel like the other side of it doesn't really get as much exposure. And I feel like not that a documentary about making a documentary would be so asinine. I can't imagine anyone would want to watch that. But there is like, you hear like stories of people tell commentaries like Andi Timoner, who did We Live in Public and Dig, like just even hearing about her life like off camera, where you're just like, how is there not a movie about you? Like that's its whole, like you were making these movies at the same time and a third one. And like, you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy that there are so many dimensions of it. And like, you have to draw a line somewhere where like not only just the, like, we got to focus this on what the story is about, but also if it has to get meta, where do you cut off the meta part of it and not take over your own movie? Like Chimp Crazy is a good example of that, where like the director did sort of have to become part of the story, but it ultimately was more about rescuing Tonka and all that. So it's crazy to me that, and the fact that I was just already going to be in LA when this premiere was happening, and I was just like, fuck yeah. And I got to meet you guys and we're all on the same page, it seems like, in terms of like just how crazy this whole thing is, but also just like you know, like the thrill of like getting a piece of footage and being like, holy shit, this exists. This is on camera. That's amazing. Like there's no bigger high than that as a documentary filmmaker, because it's like it's stranger than fiction, you know, like there's so many moments that you can see in a documentary where you're just like it'll make you open your eyes where you're like, I've never seen this ever. And you couldn't even script it. And if you did, it wouldn't be believable. But I know it happened. I'm watching someone film it. Someone happened to be filming it, and it was in focus. And you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy, man. And it seems like it's been a long journey for you guys. And I hope, I mean, do you have more docs on the, like more ideas in the, or do you want to maybe take a break and
No,
go back to the
no
nice
breaks.
scripted side of things?
No breaks. I've got a few that are kind of in a similar space. I don't know if I'm seeking out these subjects and characters or if they're finding me, but similar in the true crime. Can't say too much about them, but equally crazy, but also with a little bit of humor as well.
Nice. Yeah. And
So you got bit by the bug, is what you're
Yeah,
I
saying.
think
she's in the
so,
bug.
a little bit. I mean, it's exciting, and then it's a very interesting genre, and I get excited by it. Like fascinating stories that have bigger meanings and bigger pictures. But it's very much this project was everything I ever wanted to make in a doc. Is it's got an incredible, you know, subject and incredible subject matter, and also the access and like the archive, just adding elements to it, but it allowing us to tell a story in a way that's entertaining but means a bit more.
yeah. And I'm working in the true crime space as well, but I'm adapting a true crime podcast at the moment into a narrative feature.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I hope that Never Get Busted gets picked up on the biggest platform possible. I think everyone should see it. It really genuinely, like, I might come across biased, but I did genuinely find it really good and entertaining. So I really hope that more people get a chance to see it, because like you said, it's a crazy story and it's got to be seen to be believed. I guess there's one thing we didn't really talk about, which is what was it like being in the room with Barry for the first time?
I mean, we'd spoken to him like a bunch of times on Zoom beforehand. So we had like we knew what we were in for to a large degree. And then I remember when we picked him up from the airport and I was like, oh yeah, he is a big personality. He's a huge personality. But when you've built up that rapport over, you know, we'd been talking to him at that point for like close to a year by the time we filmed with him.
February to
February.
Yeah,
so pretty much for a
Like a
year
year.
we'd been in contact with him. And so, yeah, by the time we were sitting there, and Barry's a kind of person who comes sort of locked and loaded. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't require a lot. It's like cameras on, let's go. And he can just talk, you know, and he can just tell you his story and really just go. And he's just an incredibly natural storyteller. So there's not a lot but to sort of sit back through a lot of the process and let him kind of have the space.
Just watching the movie through the monitor, kind of.
Yeah, you are watching it like, you know, over a 5-day period. And during that 5-day period, yeah, there were discoveries. There were like tangents. We like, no matter how much research like Erin had done, there were like moments like, wait, what happened? You know, like you were just like, you know, these little kind of truth bombs would drop.
Yeah, I think that, there's like the first Zoom that we have with him, which is like, wow, you know, this is like, we finally made contact. We don't know if this is going to happen or not. We still have to kind of work all that out. But it was crazy that we're like speaking to him, like, oh, this is really exciting. And then we get to see him in person, and that's another layer of excitement. Like, oh, this is actually happening. He's, you know, very live. This is a live project. And then sitting in the room during the interview, I remember watching in the monitor and him telling a specific story. I can't remember at one point, but I was like, this is something. And you just had a moment as like the filmmaker, like, oh my God, this is something bigger than I actually ever expected. And I think this is going to resonate, which is a really cool moment.
I had that exact moment with Travis where I think it's probably like hour 2 or 3 into the interview. I'm like, I don't think this is going to be a 20-minute YouTube video anymore. That was my original plan. I was just going to do like one of the, like, it was mostly going to be me narrating. And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll get a soundbite or two. But it's like, no, by the end of it, I'm not in it at all, which I got to say, I like that part. I like not being, you know, showing this to people and be like, and now listen to my voice. Like, no, I want you to, I like being able to just, in a way, use my subjects to do the talking for me.
Yeah, to bring it full circle as well. I mean, that, Travis was also one of those, people that we met that were just great at it, just immediately great at it. Like, don't really.
Well, it's because
need
he's
a
been
lot
on the
from
other
you.
side of it for so long.
That
Like,
can
he
be a
knows what you
hindrance.
need for the cut.
That can be a hindrance. Like,
Yeah.
because I have interviewed people like that in the past, and they're too much in their head. They're too much thinking, and so they're not present through the interview itself. But Travis wasn't like that at all. He hit it, but it didn't make it feel like he was overthinking it.
Yeah, and he felt comfortable as well. And I think we talked a little bit about, like, he had an emotional moment as well. We'll just give a little snippet of it in the doc where he talks about kind of how he was caught with a small amount of marijuana. But it's just that little snippet of, we kept that in the edit so audiences could get an understanding of why this person also did this as well. Like, it meant something to him.
Right. I completely understood why after a certain point he said, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with this. This is too much. Because I think that's the normal reaction. And that's why he works so well in the doc, just as in general, because he is just the audience surrogate. He is having the reaction that you would have in his shoes. And God, man, I really want this to be as big as it can, because it really should. I don't want Barry to end up like Joe Exotic in the same way, but I do think that there is that same sort of appeal that really people should. And it's not even just like, look at this crazy character. It's also you're making really salient points about, the war on drugs and past and present and maybe future. So it's a whole lot of stuff in one package. And the fact that there's even more that I haven't seen is just super exciting. And I hope everything that you guys want to share with the world finds its way, because you've clearly put the work in, and there's something there. You guys got it. You kids got it.
Thanks. No, I appreciate for having us here and being able to chat about it.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
thank you very much.
taking time to do it, because this was the one thing I really wanted to do, was be able to pick your guys' brains about this whole crazy thing that we call filmmaking and the non-conventional ways in which it gets done. And God, I really do think that whether or not you agree with how Barry presents himself in modern day with, whatever, I think you can watch this doc not knowing anything about him and come away rooting for him. Because I did. I wanted this doc to educate me about, like, the nitty gritty about what went down back then, because I only really knew the highlights. And so I think you struck the right balance to where you're not trying to pander, but I think it naturally, like you said, he's a character, and he knows how to tell a story. And I think that's going to really get people, and just the activism too, the whole Yolanda thing. And yes, he did just walk right up to the police and say, fuck you. But obviously that had its own consequences. So you end up rooting for him then as sort of this like fugitive of the law, like it almost like a Snowden type, but not nearly on as big of a scale. So it's just, go see it. Go see Never Get Busted if you can, whenever it's out in festivals or showings, or if this eventually gets posted when it's, picked up and streaming somewhere, go watch it. I don't know, but it's worth seeing. And it's just, this is crazy. This is crazy. The fact that, like, there is this weird, like, tiny little tether of a connection between the two. Like, I could not have anticipated that when I was like, why didn't they make that third lightsaber short? So I got nothing else to say other than thank you.
No,
Right? No, thank you so much for having us.
Appreciate it.
All right.
And now I'm hungry, very hungry.
Oh, so am I, goddamn. All right, cut.